we were stuck in the regulatory system. We decided to quit. So we decided to close down the legal defense fund. And I don't know whether it was something with water or the air in 2001 or 2002. I don't know whether things were just getting blatantly so bad that people started wanting to push back. I don't know what the deal was at that point in time. But phone calls coming into our office, they changed quite a bit. And the phone calls coming in from communities, they would call us up and they would say, well, we have a 15,000 head hog factory farm that's been slated for our community. Smithfield Foods Corporation wants to put it in. Our vision of sustainable agriculture for our community doesn't include a 15,000 head hog factory farm in the middle of our rural community. And they would say, we want to stop it. Our response previous to that, over the last 6 years, has been, well, you can't, because under the U.S. system of law, if something's deemed a legal use, L-E-G-A-L, in other words, it's permitted and it's legal, municipalities are prohibited from banning those uses, which is also a little known, well-settled law. And if you ask the corporate lawyers, the environmental lawyers will agree, it's well-settled law, it has been so for the past 100 years, that if something's been deemed a legal use at the state level, and a permit's been issued, or some other designation of legality attached to it, that a municipality, which is us, the city of Portland, our municipal corporations, the Antioch County, Benton County, Lane County, whatever we are, that we are prohibited from actually banning that use from coming in if it's been deemed a legal use under the law. Because if we attempt to do so, then we get sued by the corporations for violating their corporate constitutional rights. And so folks kept calling in and was saying, we want to stop this, we want to stop that. We gave our little speech, as the learned lawyers who have been doing this for a while. And instead of stopping there, people being happy with being regulatory pawns and being diced back and forth within the regulatory system, doing permits and getting stuck in the script, they started asking a one-word question that we didn't quite know how to answer when it got to the end. And we would say, well, you can't do that because you'll get sued. And they would say, well, why? And we said, well, because corporations have constitutional rights in the United States today. And it's not limited to just corporate personhood, which has become fairly sexy. But there's a bunch of other doctrines, like pre-emption, where corporations use our state government, like your Oregon State Legislature is about to do on September 30th, to preempt your communities from actually controlling genetically modified organisms within your municipalities. That's on the water right now. Both parties have agreed to it, the government's agreed to it, and so they actually move through on the 30th unless people get it here and stop it. So you got preemption, you got corporate personhood rights, you got something called the Commerce Clause, where corporations can sue your municipalities if you interfere with interstate commerce. And then you have this real sick little puppy called Dillon's Rule, which says that your relationship to the state is one of a parent to a child. That the state is a parent, your municipality is a child, and unless you're specifically authorized to pass law in certain areas, that you cannot. And the corporation actually uses that to say your municipality has overstepped its authority by passing something that has no authority to pass under state law. And so we would go through these facets with the community. The community would listen politely, and we would say, well, corporations have these rights. And they would say, why? And we would say, well, starting back in the 1800s, early 1800s, actually, 1819, 1816, that region, that courts in the United States began declaring that corporations had certain constitutional rights. Right? So it's been a while, and it's well settled law, and corporations have these rights, and the courts have declared that they have these rights. And so the community group on the end of the other end of the phone would say, why? And we'd say, well, the U.S. Constitution, our Constitution itself, actually made it pretty easy for corporate personhood and other corporate rights to be found within the text, because the U.S. Constitution actually elevates property and commerce rights above the rights of people, communities, and nature. In fact, nature is not mentioned in the Constitution. And neither is labor, except for bonded labor, which of course refers to slaves, African Americans. It's the only place labor occurs in the U.S. Constitution. And of course, when the Constitution was written, it only protected a very small percentage of people in this country, white males with property, right? So women weren't persons, African Americans weren't persons, white males without property were not persons, not to mention cougars and forests and rivers and all the natural ecosystems and features of the community. And so when it came down to it, less than 1% of the active two-legged bipeds in the United States were actually covered by any constitutional protection And the boys that wrote the Constitution were of a certain bent. Doesn't mean they were bad people. It just meant that they thought that the future lay in economic growth, economic development of a certain kind. They looked across the landscape, saw an endless bounty of natural resources, and decided that the best way for the United States to grow and prosper was actually to exploit those natural resources the quickest way possible. And that's what they built into the text of the Constitution. And gosh darn it, they did a really good job, because we're still doing it, and we've been doing it for a while. And so we say to the community here, well, it's because the U.S. Constitution lends itself to this. Corporate personhood was an inevitability in some ways, because of the way the Constitution was DNA. Because if you're going to give the highest rights to commerce and property, it makes sense to clothe the largest economic actors who do that commerce and property with the same rights. It actually set up a runway, and then over the next 150 years, the corporations just landed their planes on it. That's in essence how the constitutional structure was set up. And so we would explain this to the communities, and then the community would really have another line and say, what? And we would say, well, it goes back to English common law, and the fact that the English put in place a system of law. William the Conqueror conquered England, and he subordinated the indigenous people there, and he put in place this English system of law. The English system of law was all about property and commerce over people, communities, and nature, because that's what they did. And when William the Conqueror came in and took the land that was not his, they established a English common law, which generally are referred to as finders keepers. It's a finders keepers system of law. We discovered you. We're now putting in a system of law that governs you. Then they used it to colonize other places like Barbados and India, where they cut the thumbs off all the master weavers to make them dependent upon English textiles. It's a nasty little history that we have in this country. It's a nasty little system of law that we have in this country. It's that system of law that actually became the U.S. constitutional structure in the United States. So we would say it goes back to English common law. In fact, corporate person is not new. It goes back to church corporations, goes back to other English corporations, and so long history there of stuff. And we would explain that to the community after about 2 hours on the phone. And they would say, why? And we would say, because God said so. We don't know why, right? But that conversation with communities who were unwilling to back off basically became the nugget for our democracy schools, which are 2-day trainings of municipal officials, lawyers, and community leaders. Basically, put it in a summary format, what is it about this country that we don't know? What is it about this country that we believe it is that it really isn't? Right? I mean, it's about taking away the myths and the camouflage and how the system actually functions. It turns out in 2001, 2002, people were ready to have that conversation in some ways, at least in Pennsylvania, where we were working. And one of the reasons they were ready to have that conversation was that the south central part of the state of Pennsylvania was targeted for about 150 new factory hog farmers. They come into the central part of the state. Corporations did their jimbo jambo, and they went to the legislature and got a law passed that actually allowed them to come into these municipalities, even though the municipalities had laws that otherwise would have stopped them. So they used the state legislature to preempt the municipalities to drive the factory farms in. That's going to sound very familiar because, again, your state legislature on September 30th is going to take action to actually stop you from doing anything about GMOs in your community, using the same mechanism of preemption. And of course, we've had the idea driven our arm since kindergarten. Preemption is all about the federal, preempting the state preempting local. We can't do anything the state tells us we can't do, and we can't do anything the federal government tells us what we can't do. And the answer is, how's that working for us? Right? Because when power gets centralized in a smaller and smaller number of hands as it goes with the ladder, it's easier to control. Right? It's much easier when 1,600 municipalities in a given state don't have authority, because then you can just control the state level, and you can actually dictate what we can and can't do within the municipalities where we live within the state. It's a very nice little tool that they have there to use against us. In Pennsylvania, these folks facing off against factory farms decided to ditch the regulatory bullshit and actually moved in a different direction. And that different direction was to begin to ban corporate farms altogether within central Pennsylvania. And we explained to them, before they started on that kick, which was the beginning of this work, basically, in 2001, we said, well, you can't do that. Have you been listening to us? You can't ban this stuff. It's illegal use. The state issues a permit, the factory farms go in, you're going to get sued. And you can't do it, it's indignity against the law, right? Because we follow supervisors in those areas, the elected officials that we were working with in the community group said, we don't care. Okay? And I said, what do you mean you don't care? You gotta care. You could get sued, your municipality could get bankrupted, you could go through this whole process. And they looked back at us and they said, well, you know, if we do it, maybe somebody else does it too. And if somebody else does it, maybe 10 other places do it as well. And maybe if 10 other places do it, then 100 do it. And maybe if 100 do it, 1,000 do it. And maybe, just maybe, that begins to stop what's happening. Right? And I said, well, that's a load of shit. Right? Because that's not how it works, right? So we had to be dragged kicking and screaming into this process because folks had finally gotten to a point where they were willing to become disobedient enough to actually frontally disobey the law. Right? And that hasn't really happened in massive numbers for the past 120-some years. In fact, the last real movement that we had in the United States was probably the populist movement, late, and took on the banking companies and the railroad corporations, actually the economic structure of stuff that was so basic in some ways to the country about who decides. You know, who decides on big issues like agriculture and transportation and energy. All those things have been centralized up, mostly to the federal government, some of the state government, but away from our hands. They don't want our digits anywhere near that stuff, right? They don't want us at the lower level making any of those kinds of decisions, but they want to centralize control over that stuff higher up. It hasn't happened in a long time in the United States, and there's almost been a Pavlovian system of punishment existing in the U.S. So when folks in the state of Virginia back in the 90s passed an out-of-state waste ban, to stop out-of-state waste from coming into Virginia and filling up their landfills. Radical idea. They wanted their own shit to fill their landfills rather than stuff from New York State or other places coming in. So they passed an out-of-state waste ban. We don't want your waste. The Supreme Court then declares that garbage is commerce under the Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution. Virginia is sued by Waste Management Corporation. They win. And the state has to pay their damages because they violated the corporation's Commerce Clause rights. Right? We're in the state of Iowa. Iowa gets sued by the Smithfield Foods Corporation. Iowa had this novel idea. They wanted to stop monopoly ownership over pork production so that companies couldn't both own the pigs and own the processing plants. Because when that happens, the corporation controls the entire process and is able to exercise monopoly control to gash farmers and push down the price and all that kind of stuff. Smithfield Foods Corporation sued, contending that the law violates the Commerce Clause because pork production is commerce. And wins. Right? State of Vermont, people in Vermont to pass a BGH labeling law, that they just want to know whether dairy, not rerouting, we just want to know whether our dairy products that we're buying and consuming contain artificial bovine growth hormone, which is the stuff they shoot into cows and increase milk production. Right? Pretty simple. Well, the Grocery Retailers Association, of which Monsanto Corporation is a member, sues them, contends that their labeling law violates the corporation's right not to be compelled to speak under the First Amendment. Right? It wins. Right? So Vermont has to, the law's overturned, and it goes the way of the dodo. There are examples like that out the yin-yang. We've tracked down a couple hundred of these stories where people tried. People tried to do stuff over the years. There's many more stories like that. But it's Pavlovian because we get the shit beat out of us when the system punishes us for moving outside the very careful box that we've been allowed to exist in over the past 150 years. And that box, is very small. It's actually getting smaller by the day because they're even cutting off the regulatory stuff now. This is maybe off topic, but in Iowa, I was giving a talk, and people started talking about how they now go to state agency hearings. The agencies have hearings, and you can go and talk about it into the microphone. Don't worry, it's not connected, but they talk to the microphone anyway, and expect the agency to do X, Y, and Z for them. But they have a form, so you go and you testify. Well, about 2 years ago in Virginia, the State Department of Transportation decided that they didn't want rallies to be held in the form of those public comment hearings. So, people go to the public comment thing to make trouble. They don't want the thing to come in. So that's the point of giving the comments. So the state agencies have gotten worried that it's like infectious. Somebody comes in and gives a comment, and they tape it. They then transcribe your comments, but it's intended so that nobody else can hear what you're saying in that room. And so it's like, how bad does it have to get before we begin to do something real? You know, that the insane begin to take over the asylum. Or as Janet Morse likes to say, she says, grab onto your purse, we're going over the wall. Because it seems to be that that's the place we're in, right? Where it's all a dog and pony show, and the stuff happens whether we want it to or not, and yet our activism is not really commensurate with the problems we now face in terms of the crises, whether it's governing authority that we don't have, or the environmental problems that we face, or climate change, or any of this other stuff. We're still in the mode of let's write a letter to Congress, or let's hold a sign, or lead a protest, or buy a Prius, or change a light bulb, or do all the things that have been preset for us in some ways, to exercise our powers as consumers, or become a stakeholder in the process, right? I guess I said this last night, I'll say it again, it's fun. I said last night that I'm getting really tired of people saying, well, we just want a seat at the table. That's all we want. You know, progressives, you know, liberal. Well, you know, all we want is a seat at the table. Well, I got news. We own the fucking table. It's our table. We own the chairs. We own the table. We own everything. It says so, right, in our Constitution, right? It says we, the people, are the source of all governing authority. Wow. Okay. Well, that's what it says in words, but it certainly doesn't bear out that way. And so, in the system of law that we operate under, the structure of law that we obey, partly because there's this myth and camouflage that the founding fathers were the best people that ever trod the planet, and the best rights people ever trod the planet. And then they set up a system of law that's a democracy, and so it's our fault when we lose, right? When we have these battles and we lose, because then we say to ourselves, well, we just need to get a couple more people out of the demonstration, or we just needed a couple more letters in the mail, or we needed another microphone, or we needed a better flip chart, or we needed this or that. We actually blame ourselves for the loss when the structure is really rigged, and we've been sugared. And the question, and of course our work, and Paul's work in Oregon, the folks that are doing the work in Yale and Justine and Benton and Lane County in Oregon, which is very exciting stuff, are finally saying, no more. We're not going to do it anymore. For 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, 70 years, we've had this vision, a sustainable vision for the places where we live, but we're no closer to actually implementing that vision through law than we were 60 years ago, 70 years ago. We've had stuff sitting on the shelves gathering dust. We figured it out academically, how you do it, how you have sustainable energy and sustainable agriculture. There's no secret in what the systems require, what the systems look like. We just have never had the legal or political authority to actually drive them into law, because they violate counter rights that have been established in the law and concocted, manufactured for us over the past 150 years. And so we're stuck, right? We've been stuck for a while. And meanwhile, we're on the edge, and in fact, crossing over into ecological collapse. I mean, the United Nations came out a couple weeks ago and said this is a major planetary catastrophe that we are now facing because of the actions that we've taken across the globe. And so in the United States, the structure of law is that we're in a box. Our activism has been boxed in. And on each side of the box is different legal doctrines that have been concocted over the years to keep us in that box. One is corporate personhood, one is corporate commerce clause rights, which we talked about. Another one is Dillon's rule, and then pre-emption. They've been very carefully manufactured to make sure that we can't say anything about the big stuff that happens. We can't make determinations and decisions about the big stuff that happens. Sure, we can sit in our local government meetings and talk about noxious weed ordinances, which I've done for 4 hours at a time, helping out local government officials. Talk about, do we allow weeds to get 6 inches tall, or do we allow them to get 7 inches tall before we call that a nuisance, right? And the 3 people that show up, 2 of which are sleeping, one is the local newspaper reporter, because nothing really happens in those meetings anyway, because nothing's supposed to happen in those meetings, because the structure's built the way it is. So the major question that we began to ask in these communities that we were assisting in Central Pennsylvania began to ask is, can we build sustainability, economic and environmental sustainability, while operating within that box that has been designed for us? Because if we can, then we can all go home. I mean, it's only 7 o'clock, and talk about other stuff. But if we come to the conclusion that those doctrines actually prevent us from building the type of system that we need to build, and actually stopping those from harming us who are using those doctrines to do so, then we've got a lot of work ahead of us, because we have to dismantle that system and actually create one from almost scratch, right? That's the job that's ahead of us. And so, what does that look like? Well, in 2001, some small municipalities in Pennsylvania began to ban corporate farms. And then, because the conversation began to turn to corporations, because guess what? 4 corporations in the United States control 70% of pork production in the United States. 1 corporation controls 60% of cheese production. It's Kraft. 5 corporations control 7% of chicken production in the United States. So instead of fighting over parts per million or air pollution or water pollution or the types of things that we talk about when we deal with factory farms or other things coming in, which are all really symptoms of something larger, that maybe, just maybe, we should start going upstream and figuring out why those things are happening in the first place and who's making the decisions that affect our communities in an adverse way. And that actually means looking in the agriculture field, at least at the corporatization of agriculture, because that's what we've had over the past 40, 60 years. Our agricultural system has been corporatized. We've lost 600,000 family farmers in the United States. And we always use the word lost. It's very passive. It's like we can't find them. We've been looking for them, but we can't find them. Well, they've been driven out of business by a thoroughly corporatized system. If you want to do pork production in the United States, if you want to raise pigs in a commercial sense, you can't do it independently anymore and actually get those hogs to market, because all those vehicles have been shut down. And they've been shut down by these direct contracts that corporations make with farmers. They're called output contracts, whereby hogs are raised. And again, a little bit tangential, but it was touched on anyway. What do those contracts do? Well, they turn ownership of the farm animals over to the corporation under the agreement. Unless the animal dies, and then title reverts back to the farmer. The animal. In addition, the corporation shifts all environmental liability to the farmer to get rid of the environmental liability might not otherwise fall on the corporation, because they used to buy farms themselves. They used to be driving down the road and see a Smithfield Foods sign, or see a Hatfield Foods sign, but they actually bought farms. The problem is, they understood at some point that buying the farms meant that liability flowed with that ownership. So they came up with a new ownership system that, in essence, now transfers all that environmental liability onto the farmers. So it's almost like a serf relationship that farmers have been yanked into. To make it worse, to make it worse, they now take farmers into these output contracts and, in essence, force them to put other family farmers out of business, because they become a part of the machine that is then thrusting other farms out of business, because it's creating a marketplace that the other farmers can't compete in. So it's like the nastiest of stuff happening, right? It's all under the covers, pretty much. Although China is now taking everybody from the rural areas to drive into the cities, because the Chinese understand that industrialization, full industrialization, means you got to get people off the land and you got to stick them into the cities and the factories, right? Which was a nasty little secret about our economic program back in the 20s and the 30s, where we did exactly the same thing, which was to drive farmers off the land. Doesn't sound very sustainable to me. And so, with South Central PA municipalities starting to pass these corporate anti-corporate farming laws, a conversation that started to bubble up in central Pennsylvania. And that conversation wasn't bubbling up from liberal progressive communities. Central Pennsylvania is rural, conservative. These are the guys with the shit kickers and the John Deere hats, and somebody said belt buckles that would make Texas proud. These were the folks in these rural communities trying to fight these factory farms off. And the conversation was, we need to stop these things coming in, but we need to do it in a structural way. One that actually goes after the source of the problem rather than the symptom stuff. And to this day, I look back and I remember, I have some memories, some fond, some others, of us traveling the state, talking to groups of municipal officials all across the state about these issues, about corporate farming, passing local ordinances, doing that kind of work. And I used to tell them, but you have to be careful, because even if you pass these ordinances, they can be challenged. You can get sued by the agribusiness corporations, because corporations have constitutional rights. And we would go into that. We would say, here's all the rights that they have. Here's how they got them. But we know all this stuff because we're lawyers, right? And we studied it. And we knew it. We're the learning folks about all this stuff. We were talking about corporate rights. And that their ordinance would be overturned. And by and large, all the municipal officials and the communities we were working with, their eyes would glaze over. And they would say, well, that might be Because we live in a democracy. And we've come together and we've passed this law. And we're going to enforce this law. And it's a democracy, which means we have the right to do that. Don't bother us with that corporate rights stuff. We don't understand it. We're not going to take the time to understand it. We just don't get it. And it all sounds very academic to us. All right. So countless meetings after countless meetings after countless meetings trying to talk to people about corporate rights stuff as the superstructure of law they have to deal with. Didn't work. Couldn't get the message through. We weren't well known enough to have people listen to us, the experts were doing. And so we waited, right? We just waited. These ordinances kept multiplying. Eventually we had 100 communities in Pennsylvania, about a tenth of all the rural municipal townships in Pennsylvania, who would now pass these different kinds of laws, which were now corporations directly. Lo and behold, one of the small municipalities in central Pennsylvania got a knock on the door one morning, and the knock was from the sheriff, the local sheriff. And he was serving a complaint on the municipality. The municipality had been sued. So the local township officials got a copy of the complaint, looked at it. Sure enough, on page 1, it said, "We are an agribusiness corporation. We are persons under the law. And you have violated, by passing this anti-corporate farming law, our 14th Amendment rights to equal protection of the law." 14th Amendment equal protection says, as persons, all persons have a right to equal application and protection of the laws. The lawsuit said, we are corporate persons, and your law discriminates against us because it bans corporate farmers, but doesn't ban family farmers from engaging in farming.